In Philadelphia, from the College of Education, Temple University, this is Profiles in Literature, featuring interviews with authors and illustrators prominent in American literature for children. The moderator for this series is Dr. Jaqueline N. Shachter, Associate Professor of Children's Literature with Temple University. Today's special guest is Mr. Scott Odell.
It's a tremendous pleasure to present the naturalist and outstanding author for young people, Scott Odell. With us today is an audience of teachers, librarians, and students, all very much interested in children's literature, all fascinated by your work. Joining and greeting you is your friend Carolyn Field, Coordinator of Work with Children for the Free Library of Philadelphia, my Profiles in Literature companion. Mr. Odell, why are your books generally set on the sea, in Mexico, or the Southwest?
Simply, I was born in Los Angeles, which is very close to the sea, and spent a lot of time in Mexico. And inasmuch as you write, a writer writes out of his memories, it would be natural for me to write about the things that I know about and I've experienced.
I love the content. I asked Mr. Odell to bring a picture of his diesel cruiser in Arctic waters. This is the boat after he made the voyage that inspired what book?
That's a Cruise the Arctic Star. It's taken about 10 miles south of Skagway, which is a jumping off place for the 98 miners.
And I also have a picture of Mr. Odell with his 5-year-old poodle, Beauregard.
2 words, Beauregard.
We included this because we feel that Mr. Odell's is a dog lover in the same sense that Corona dearly loved Rontu, an island of the blue dolphins. Why did you, an authority on California history, choose fairly recently to move from the west to the east coast?
It was simply, again, a matter of being a subject to tides and fortune. And my wife was managing editor of Psychology Today, and they moved the magazine from Del Mar, California, to New York.
Oh, I see.
And she went, and I went with her.
That's the way it works.
We're awfully glad that you came east so that you could be with us today, Scott.
Thank
You know that I'm one of your great fans, adore your books, every one of them, for a long time.
Yes.
And there are a lot of other people, though, that agree with me because you've probably won more medals than almost anybody else, and
Just
prestigious
MacArthur,
medals.
General MacArthur.
Well, perhaps he strings them on his front, but you don't. But you certainly have won them, and we have the medals with us today, which Dr. Shachter is going to show. The Newbery Medal, which you won in 1961 for Island of the Blue Dolphins, given by the American Library Association. The Hans Christian Andersen Medal, given in 1972 by the International Board of Books for Young People, which is given by 15 countries in the world for your complete body of work. You've won 2 German awards, the Jugend Prize, one for Island of the Blue Dolphins and one for the King's Fifth. Probably one award that you like is the William Allen White Award from Kansas that was given for a book selected by the children as their favorite.
Yes, that's interesting.
And then we have another award for your complete body, which is given by the University of Southern Mississippi for the body of your work.
What did you win the William Allen White for? Island?
That was for the Island of the Blue Dolphins, too.
Yes.
As outstanding as your awards are the books you've written, all published by Houghton Mifflin. Island of the Blue Dolphins, your first book for young people, winner of the John Newbery Medal, and 3 Newbery Honor Books, The King's Fifth, The Black Pearl, and Sing Down the Moon, Journey to Jericho, The Dark Canoe, The Treasure of Topo el Bampo, The Cruise of the Arctic Star, The Hawk That Dare Not Hunt by Day, Child of Fire, Zia, and The 290. I know of no other author who has won the Newbery Medal and 3 Newbery Honor Books. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you've broken all records.
Somebody has won, I believe Crumgo won 2 medals.
2 Newberys, but not 3 Newbery Honor
No,
Books in
not
addition
that,
to the
yeah.
winner. We just think it's amazing. Children
It is very
delight.
amazing.
Oh, it is.
It's quite amazing.
You've worked for it. You've worked for it. Children delight in illustrating, particularly Island of the Blue Dolphins, and I'm going to show some samples. This was done by a 6th grade child showing the island. By a 3rd grade child, we have a view of Corona. And look at this. The 4th grader tried to do a dolphin, which isn't easy. But why are so few of your books for older children professionally illustrated?
Probably because I don't like illustrations. I think that if you do, as a writer, do what you should do, that there's no necessity for an illustration.
I quite agree with you because, like the children, I get pictures in my mind from your words alone. One example of your power with words is the very title, Island of the Blue Dolphins, which is so much more descriptive than San Nicolas Island, where the story takes
much
place.
more. I had trouble with that title. At first I called it Corona, after the girl. And then I just, Island of the Dolphins, and there's something wrong with that. The sound is wrong. So Island of the Brown Dolphins, they are brown, you know, with white bellies, but Island of the Brown Dolphins doesn't do it either. So I fudged a little, call it Island of the Blue Dolphins.
You made the correct decision, unquestionably. We're going to focus now on your Newbery Medal winner. What's the treasure you have with you, Carolyn?
Well, my treasure is the original manuscript of Island of the Blue Dolphins, which Scott Odell gave to the Free Library of Philadelphia. And when he gave it to us, we discovered the first page was missing. And so he wrote it out in longhand instead of the typescript. So you have the first page written in his own handwriting, and then we have the second page is the beginning of the typescript manuscript. This is one of the treasures of the Rare Book Department of the Free Library of Philadelphia. Scott, what inspired you to write this book to begin with? It was your first children's book?
Yes, it was.
Yes.
I was just damn mad at the, should I say damn?
Sure.
I was damn mad at the hunters who came into our mountains and killed everything that crept or walked or flew. And I thought I might write a letter to the newspapers. And, I realized right away that that's, ephemeral. And out of this anger, objectively, I sat down to do a book that I thought would affect children, particularly girls, that having read the book and someday having children of their own, that they would do something about this slaughter of innocent animals. And this is why I wrote the book. That was the impulse, that was the motivation. I think it's a rather interesting story with that I'd had the idea for a long while, and I was familiar with the legend. It's a true legend. And I don't know whether that's, you can say a legend is true. If it's a legend, it's a legend. If it's true, I don't know, maybe. Anyway, it's a true story. And I had it in mind and thought someday I might do it. And then one day I had a very dear friend, Maud Lovelace, who wrote the Betsy Tacy stories. And Maud says, I'd like to have lunch with you. And so we had lunch, and during the lunch she said, I have read a book of yours called Country of the Sun, and in that you relate a story about a girl who spent 18 years alone on an island in the Pacific Ocean. And I wonder, do you know any more about this girl than you wrote in Country of the Sun? And instantly, immediately, I knew that she wanted to write this book. And I said, I'm terribly sorry, Maud, but I have already begun that story.
God bless you. I am so glad.
And I was
fast
so
thinking.
bedizened by this outright, outrageous lie that I told my dear friend that I rushed home and sat down the typewriter to get it right.
To make it be truthful.
So that was the beginning of Dolphins.
How wonderful.
Yes.
Well, how was Karana brought to the mission? How did she get,
She was rescued, this is true. She was rescued by the only boat on the Pacific coast at that time called Peoris Nada. Better than nothing, right? And it was just a 30-foot boat, and they sent it over there. It's a very stormy island. It's out in the Pacific, stormy. And they picked everybody up and thought they had everybody, but the little boy was left ashore, and Karana jumped in the water and to go back and be with him. And when she was rescued, she was taken to the mission at Santa Barbara. And she lived there for about 2 months and died of some mysterious illness. Nobody seems to know. You can be romantic and say that she died of a broken heart, that she longed for her island, and it's possible. I pick it up again in a book I wrote called Zia, which just has come out this last spring. And I was very anxious to do it. Children had written about what happened to Karana. And I thought that I should write a book about it, and my publishers fought it. Every time I'd bring it up, which would be about every 2 or 3 years, they'd say, well, write a book, but don't write about Karana again. We don't want a sequel. I said, it isn't a sequel. And so I just crept up on them. I wrote the book. They asked me what I was writing, and I said, I'm writing about go-go girls in New Orleans. And so I just sprung it on them, and here they had it, and they had to, had to publish it. And I guess they like it. I don't know.
We have a surprise. We have some views of Mission Santa Barbara in California, where Karana was taken after her rescue. There's a picture of the mission itself, and also a picture of you see this fine picture of the mission?
Yes, that's a good picture. Very good. Very good facade. It's been shaken down about 6 times, Oh. This is not the original building.
And we also have a picture of the marker above her grave in the mission cemetery. It's a little bit difficult to read what it says on the marker, and so I'm going to share the words with you. The marker, incidentally, is dedicated to Juana Maria, as the padre at the mission called her, the person you've named, Karana. The marker reads, Juana Maria, Indian woman abandoned on San Nicolas Island 18 years. Found, brought to Santa Barbara by Captain George Nidiver in 1853. Santa Barbara chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution, 1928.
Well, the interesting thing about that is that the plaque did not exist until Dolphins was written.
Oh, yes.
And they didn't know anything about her up there. You go up and ask, and they knew nothing. But since when the book came out, they did do it. So the book did have that influence.
Oh, certainly it's had an impact all over the country. I would like to ask you about one thing. At the 1976 book, Zia, presupposes that Karana's sister, the mother of your character, Zia, survived on the mainland. But at the end of Island of the Blue Dolphins, Karana says that she learned that the ship with all of the surviving members of her tribe, including her sister, was sunk in a storm. What do you think really happened?
No, I think it's a misreading of what was said. The ship was sunk. It sunk in San Francisco Harbor, but not with them aboard. No, this was later.
We did not know that.
This was 2 years later that this Peoris Nada was sunk in in San Francisco Bay.
I'm very glad you
Yes.
explained that.
That would have been a bad one, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah, uh-huh.
Yes.
But I always felt Corona was better off not having put her foot on that ship. That's how I rationalized
Yes,
it.
well, it delivered everyone, and then they scattered for some reason. They went to all over the Southern California, and the missionaries were eventually quite interested in what happened to them, because Corona could not speak the language, any language that was spoken at the mission, and there were several Indian dialects spoken there. So they sent couriers around, messengers around over the country, the West, attempting to find the survivors of those who were taken from the island. And nothing happened. They couldn't find them. So she died without being able to communicate, which is fortunate for me, because if she had said, they'd ask her, what did you do for 18 years sitting on the island? And she said, well, I didn't do very much. Well, what did you do? Well, I knitted a lot of sweaters. And there you would be. You'd be stuck with a girl that knitted sweaters for 18 years.
Her cormorant, how do you pronounce it? Did I pronounce it correct? Cormorant cape is now in Rome, isn't
Yes,
it?
supposedly. It was sent there. I presume it's there.
One of the questions that has always come up is, why did you, as a newspaper man, a former editor, writer of adult books for 10 years, turn to writing for young people in 1960 with Island of the Blue Dolphins?
It's purely accidental. I'm delighted that I made the change. I wouldn't go back if I could write as well as Saul Ballou and Updike and Cheever and Faulkner and all the rest. I wouldn't go back. I'd continue to write for children. And it was an accident, because when I wrote this Island of the Blue Dolphins, I had never written a children's story. I sent it to my agents, New York, and they very seldom replied to any communication within 2 or 3 months. But immediately I got a letter, and they said, we don't think much of this story. And presumably you want to write it for a girl, but girls are only interested in themselves and topical things, a little romance, a little mystery, and a regular formula, you know. And if you're serious about the book, some presumption would be if you wouldn't go to all that trouble if you weren't serious. But anyway, they said, if you are serious, we suggest you change the girl to a boy. Well, when they said that, I'd followed them up to that point, because, as I say, I had never written a children's story. And I hadn't read a children's story since I was reading, you know, as a child. My mother was reading Jack and the Beanstalk, which she read every night. And if she didn't, she had trouble. And so they just turned it down, said they didn't want to do it. So I had faith in it. And Maud Lovelace gave me most of the faith that I had. She says, it's a good book, and you just don't change it. And she says, well, we'll make one suggestion. She says, the girl, I think she should be a little more feminine, not much. So I invented the Carmen skirt episode where she makes the Carmen skirt. And I just, the novel was finished, and I just dropped it in, that paragraph. I was very careful throughout. I didn't want a feminine girl. I wanted a human being. I didn't want a girl. I wanted a human being. And this new book that I have, Carlotta, coming out in the spring, is based upon a girl's life by the name of Montero. And she lived about 1846 in Southern California. And she had the temerity to ride a stallion. It takes quite a lot of riding to ride a stallion, but to ride a stallion astride. And this wasn't done. You rode, if you're a girl, you rode side saddle. And she was a scandal of the countryside. She was a scandal of Southern California. Well, I've taken this girl and I've used her life, or this part of it, in this Carlotta. And Carlotta is raised as a boy by her father. She's raised as a boy. And it proves it's sound psychiatry, sound physiology, sound, that you can take girls and give them things that you give boys, and they can do just about as well as boys do. And this idea of, that women should be, some objects, sex objects, and, well, it's exploded. The girls are out of the cage, and so what? I've helped a little, I think. And,
You certainly have.
and I've tried in this Carlotta to show the consequences, too, of being a boy.
We're looking forward to that new book, but I want to tell you that in 1964, we've come across something else that's valuable. In 1964, Universal Studios made the film Island of the Blue Dolphins. We want to show now the jacket design of your book, Island of the Blue Dolphins. This was done by Eveline Ness. We have a view of the jacket, not quite. Here's the view of the jacket of Island
That's the
of
girl
the
in
Blue
the picture.
Dolphins. And
then look at the
and
girl.
then you can see, this is the jacket, and now you can see Celia Kay, the actress, playing the part of Corona in the movie Island of the Blue Dolphins. Also, her younger brother, Larry Donaldson, plays the part of Ramo. Chief Chowig, her father, is played by Carlos Romero, and a sub-chieftain, Kimki, by Hal John Norman. Now you see Ramo being chased by the wolves, and he's killed by them. Here is a view of Corona with her dead brother. Then Corona the hunter. This is the part you portrayed of her so well. All alone on the island. Corona picking wild fruit with one of the wolf dogs she's tamed at her feet and called Rontu. Corona and Rontu finally on the beach. What did you think of this movie?
I talked to Radness, who was a producer, before he made the picture, and I thought he was rather obtuse. And I suggested various things, and I saw rather quickly that he had made up his mind about what he wanted to do. One was to cast a girl, this Kay girl, who had had no experience at all in acting. And he chose her because she's pretty, first, so that all the girls would envy her, and all the boys would fall in love with her. She could run up and down the sand dunes very gracefully because she's a dancer. She wasn't an actress. And there was not a line that she spoke in the picture that was correctly spoken. The accents were always off. She was, descending when she should be ascending, very stiff, and I didn't like her. I would have cast the girl that played the Aleut girl, and I would have chosen her to be the lead. However, if I had done that, I would have lost my shirt because children would not have identified with her.
No, the children do identify with her. They do love her, even though
The wild
she's
one?
all the things that you say you
The
they are.
Aleut? Good,
No,
I'm glad to hear that.
with the girl that's
Well,
Corona now.
Yes, I thought that
Yeah.
she was.
Did he ask you to write the script or work on the script at all?
No, I was not. I don't think it.
Would you want it to?
No, I didn't want
think
to.
you'd be
I
better
think
off,
it should be a split there. I think it should be a new viewpoint. Incidentally, Radis did a good picture called Sounder,
Oh, yes.
but he didn't do it. Ritt, the director, did it, and he takes credit. Radis takes credit for it, but it was Ritt's picture.
But he was the producer of it.
He produced
Yes.
it. He made the money.
Right. Well,
What did you observe in the time span?
Well, I was wondering, I wanted to ask you, Scott, what you thought about the girl in the movie. Of course, it's only a few years because she doesn't age at all.
No,
but in the
no.
book, it's 18 years that she's
Yeah.
on the island.
Well, that was my
Sure,
big,
I'll-
that was my big quarrel with the picture, and it wasn't a legitimate quarrel. It wasn't a legitimate quarrel because you can't get an actress that can play 18 years credibly. An actress can play a girl 12, can't play a woman 30. It just doesn't wash.
It's hard.
So the compromise, the first compromise would have been two girls, one to play to 18, one to play from 18 to 30, and that was clumsy too. So they decided, I wasn't in it at this point. They decided that they would cut it down to 4 years. So she comes on, all gussied up, you know, and she looks like a little Girl Scout going to a marshmallow roast. And 4 years later, you know, all these things happen to her.
You may criticize all you want, but I have cried my eyes out at that film every time I've seen it, and so have others.
Let me ask you, has any other book of yours been made into film?
Yes, I just finished Black Pearl. And if I were a young man, I would get a camera and I would go out and do all of the books because, for instance, The King's Fifth, and it's about something. And here's the locale is in Veracruz. It's wonderful. How many of you have seen San Juan de Ulua in Veracruz Bay? Well, you know, take a trip down there and take a look at it someday. This is one of the greatest fortresses in the world. It's still there, sitting in the bay. It was built in the 16th century. And the walls are 30 feet thick, made of coral. And there's a dungeon, big dungeon. And, well, I'll tell you about the dungeon in my next book.
Have you ever had any correspondence that was humorous from your young readers?
Yes, I get a lot of letters that are humorous, and one comes to mind, several come to mind. There's a boy, and I'm sure this is a class assignment, and he wrote very carefully and wrote rather well. And he did 3 pages, but on the 3rd page he began to get out of breath, and he began to wind down. And suddenly, right in mid-sentence, he says, "Well, I gotta go now. Goodbye, you old jerk." I sympathize with him.
There's just time for one more, and I wanted to ask you, why did you call one of your Newbery Honor books Sing Down the Moon?
Sing Down the Moon is a line out of a poem by Robinson Jeffers. And do you remember the name of the poem? Is it Orestes or... Anyway, it's a poem by Robinson Jeffers on a Greek theme. And this is a metaphor that of all the things that you can't do, you can't dip up the ocean with a teaspoon, and you can't sing down the moon. And it's sort of ironic comment upon this girl's life, that she feels that it starts all over, and life starts over, and it's going to be continuous. But we know, looking back upon what happened to Navajos, that it wasn't continuous.
It was a hopeless
Yes,
task.
it was hopeless.
I want to thank you very much. Scott Odell, whose first name derives from his great-grandfather's first cousin, has been, Sir Walter Scott, Sir Walter Scott was his name, has been remarkably successful since his premiere book for young people was published in 1960. Now his works appear in 15 to 20 countries, many in translation. Presently, there are at least 6 in the U.S. in paperback for mass consumption. The Children's Literature Association has proclaimed Your Island of the Blue Dolphins to be among the 10 best children's books written in America in the last 200 years.
I would disagree with him.
It's no small feat. We're extremely proud of you and so glad you could be our guest today.
Thank you.